Now, again, we're studying the Civil War, and we are going through the primary sources dealing with Lincoln. And this is a primary source I do not use a lot, but I will be using more. It is Abraham Lincoln's first inaugural address, March of 1861. This particular piece is one that is generally used to glorify Lincoln. A lot of Lincoln critics do not use this particular primary source. This is not, I don't consider myself a Lincoln critic. I just want to correct history where it has been inaccurately reported. And I find some of those most interesting dynamics within the story of Lincoln as it deals with social and racial causes more so than actual Lincoln. So, in kind of setting the Lincoln narrative straight, we get a clearer picture of American social issues, which is the point of really illustrating these primary sources. I guess I should have brought my glasses, but this is not in the cards. In compliance with a custom as old as the government itself, I appear before you to address you briefly and to take in your presence the oath prescribed by the United States Constitution to be taken by the president before he enters on the execution of his office. We'll fast forward. I do not consider it necessary at the present for me to say more than I have in relation to those matters of administration, but which there is no special excitement. So, no need to talk about the ins and outs of who's going to be doing what within the administration. But he immediately gets interesting within the first page. Apprehension seems to exist among the people of the southern states that by the accession of a Republican administration, their property and their peace and their personal security are to be endangered. Now, that is very important. Number one, he's already coming into, I'm not about to do nothing with slavery. But this is bigger than this. And a lot of times you'll have a lot of people, a lot of Americans are still caught in the myth of the lost cause. The Civil War wasn't over slavery until the third year, 1863. It was over states' rights. Read the Constitution of the Confederacy. Slavery was more to Southern white people, or just to white people, period, but particularly in a unique way to Southern whites, as to where Black people defined hierarchy. Black people were seen as the lowest structure on the social hierarchy, and your distance from that group showed where you were socially. And this was no different in the North or the South. You had racism in the North, you had slavery in the South. But slavery was more than just getting work done. It was more than labor. It was the identity of what had become after Bacon's Rebellion and the anti-miscegenation laws in 1682 of what was then called whiteness. Whiteness did not exist as we know it before 1682. Whites saw themselves as English or Italian or Irish, or they identify by their nationality, not by a racial bond. And after Bacon's rebellion, that social dynamic was instituted, a kinship between Europeans, regardless of class or nationality. That was when that started. And that is very important because in the South, they were identified by their distance from the Negro, and where it was noticeable in the North and where it was understood and it was effectuated in the North, there was a degree of practiced humiliation in the South that was normalized in daily interaction. White youth were assigned adult Negroes to cater to them and speak to them in a superior tone, even though they may be 30 years old and the child is 5, 6, or 7. They had to get off of the sidewalk when white people were coming. You could not look white people in the eyes. It defined, it reinforced a identification of superiority in Southern whites, different than it did in the North. I believe it was Bessie Smith that said the difference between whites in the North and whites in the South is whites in the South don't care how big you get as long as you don't get too close, but whites in the North don't care how close you get as long as you don't get too big. That was what it was. So this mindset is not good versus evil. Okay, this is the same mindset but expressed different ways, all right? But it was closer to the daily fabric and identification of Southern life for slavery to be removed, because it did not just remove the labor, it removed the identity in the reinforcement of this identity, because from the time these whites were children, they were elevated by white supremacy and reinforced by the very victims of white supremacy. So this was more than money. This was more than work. This was a way of life. So this is why poor whites are fighting in the Civil War. I'm fighting for my identity. I'm fighting for my opportunity, because if you free him, now I have competition. And we know it was competition because before 1682, it was competition between the poor class. So you have the whites in the North that are fighting for their right to build wealth in the Western expansion. The poor whites build wealth in Western expansion, and then you have the elite whites in the North versus the elite whites in the South fighting for the expansion of their industry. No one is fighting for righteousness or equality or egalitarianism until January 1st, 1863, when black people came in and started fighting for black people, which just so happened is when the war changed. But he starts off, goes right into, this is not going to change. And then he harkens back verbatim to his Lincoln Douglas debate, where he said, I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. Now, gotta listen to what he's saying. I don't want to do anything about slavery where it exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. Lincoln was a wordsmith. Their issue was not just where it exists. We want to expand it. He knows you want to expand it. So that's what the war is about. The war isn't about, because that was never an issue. That's called a straw man. He makes up an argument. Oh, I'm not trying to take slavery over here. And they're like, we know you're trying to stop us from expanding slavery. We're the southern states, you're the northern states. We should at least have a tit for tat. And they're saying, no, we want all of this for our purpose. You want all of it for your purpose. So he's coming in actually playing with the words. All of this is around slavery. We'll skip ahead. Now, I reiterate these sentiments. In doing so, I only press upon the public attention the most conclusive evidence of which the case is susceptible, that the property, peace, and security of no section are to be anywise endangered by the now incoming administration. So basically, I'm not messing with y'all slaves, but he knows that's not what it's about. It's about the expansion. Now, he goes back and says, there's much controversy about the delivering up of fugitives from the service of labor. The clause I now read is as plainly written in the Constitution as other of its provisions, which this is actually Section 7 of the United States Constitution, Article 4, Section 2. No person held in service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another state, shall in consequence of any law or regulation therein be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up upon claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. Which means if you escape slavery and the person comes to get you, we sending you right back, which is not different than the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. So why is Lincoln so critical of the Fugitive Slave Act and yet put it in his first speech? Number one, the Fugitive Slave Act only accounts for where slavery is. So he's giving all of these assurances of something that is not of issue. It's not of issue. It's about where slavery's going, not where slavery is. And how historians have represented these things is that he is so anti-slavery, which is not necessarily the case as we continue to go forth. As declared, purpose of the Union, that it will have its own and defend itself, constitutionally defend and maintain itself. In doing so, there needs to be no bloodshed or violence unless it be forced upon the national authority. This is Lincoln actually giving us, this is why the primary sources are so good, because we know later on, Lincoln articulates this war is black people's problem. His issue is not with the violent nature of the country, of a country built on rape, torture, slave, lying, misrepresentation, education, undereducation, all of the horrid torture associated with slavery did not become an issue to Lincoln until the climate raised, till it started happening to white people. Then all of a sudden, we have to change how we're functioning with this. Very similar to today, where everybody's talking about, oh my goodness, Biden doesn't know where he is, and Trump is the Antichrist, and everybody should be worried about democracy. When for 160 years, black folks have been saying, where do you think this is going on the foundation in which it's built? So now black folks are supposed to be so excited because Biden, who has been on the wrong side of politics of black folks ever since he was a Dixiecrat with Reagan, and supported everything that hurt black folks, that made white people rich since the 1980s, until he decided to catch on to the coat of a black man to become vice president, then the coat of a black woman to become president. Now, he is what he is. The fact that people were dumb enough to not know their history, that's on them. I don't understand that. Then you have Trump, who, for all intents and purposes, has been a relative embarrassment to the white power structure, to the extent that the quasi-powerful, the most powerful people we don't see. We don't see the Walmart family. We don't see the DuPonts. We don't see the Rockefellers. We don't see the descendants of Dale Carnegie and Vanderbilt and all that. We don't see those people. The people who actually run the country, we don't see them. We don't even know who they are. But the people who are the workers that actually run the country, the corporation called the United States government that pays and regulates what rich people don't want to pay for and regulate, those powerful people, he humiliates. And now the legal system has been weaponized against a white billionaire president. Now everybody's going, it's a shame. But when Reagan did it and Nixon did it against black people, no problem. In fact, that's how slavery was perpetuated by Lincoln, because it says you can have slavery if it's punishable by a crime, which means he moved the authority of slavery from the private sector to the judiciary. So you can be treated as a slave, which immediately in 1865, convict leasing started. And after convict leasing started, Jim Crow started. And where were these things enforced? In the courts. And then we went to government-sanctioned segregation, Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court. And then the civil rights resistance, in the courts because legislation was made. The 64 Civil Rights Bill, courts, it's legislation. Voting Rights Act, legislation. All of these are dealing with interpretations involving the Supreme Court. And then we know the war on drugs with Nixon. We know that was courts. Reagan, courts. 1994 crime bill, courts. Mass incarceration, courts. Funny that the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery is the linchpin that slavery has been perpetuated, but we'll keep going. Okay, this country, with its institutions, belongs to the people who inhabit it. Whenever they shall grow weary of the existing government, they can exercise their constitutional right of amending it or their revolutionary right to dismember it or overthrow it. Now, that's what's going on at this time, and that's his biggest problem. If it is their right to overthrow it, why not change it? Why not let them have their own area? Because he was trying to call everybody back to the table. When I say everybody, we're talking about white people. He's saying, look, let's fix it. We don't have to hurt each other. We don't have to tear up the country. Let's just fix it. He was pro-white people. And Frederick Douglass said that in his July 4th speech. He said, hey, he loved white people, and all of the accolades he gets from white people he deserves. In his first speech, he's setting the ground for, he said, I have no desire to stop slavery where it exists. And then he says later in his letter to Horace Greeley, whatever I have to do, whatever negotiations I have to make with slavery, I will. And then the 13th Amendment is the ultimate negotiation of slavery. You can have it, but you got to have it this way. You can have slavery, but these people control it, not these people. He's thinking he's still going to be president. I can't trust the private sector to control it, but I'm going to give you something. You can still have slavery, but the federal government will control it. The courts, because ultimately if a lower court makes a decision and it gets appealed up high enough, the Supreme Court is going to hit it. So it was a masterful and very consistent use of words and theory. So again, we have to go to the primary sources. A lot of people comment on the channel about other books they've read or stories they've heard, popular history, movies. Even historians, most of them not Lincoln historians, but even some Lincoln historians don't agree with me. But they have one problem that is irrefutable. You got to deal with the primary sources. See, a lot of times if a lie is told long enough, people will think it's true. So we have all these egalitarian stories about Lincoln and how he loved black folks and how he grew over time to respect black folks. And he only used colonization to push emancipation. Emancipation was in place so he could colonize them, so he can get rid of them. So when you hear the great emancipator, that's half the story, and the best lies are halfway true. That's why they're believable. But every time Lincoln talked about emancipation, it was coupled with removal. And that's another funny thing. Why are historians in the 21st century still calling the removal of black people colonization? That's not colonization. A colony is connected with its imperial homeland. They share language, they share culture, they share economy, money is coming back and forth. They share military, military is going back and forth. They share citizenry. Remember, the 13 colonies, they were British citizens. They weren't Americans. When Bacon's Rebellion happened, that was the British army that came. When the Haitian Revolution happened, that was Napoleon Bonaparte that came. Where they were sending black folks, Lincoln said, when we colonize them, these are the places we're sending them because they have the greatest likelihood of becoming citizens there. That's removal. Relocation is the Native American. The difference between the blacks and the Native American is that even though blacks were here probably as long as the Native Americans, which is why they were so dark, you got to remember, when Christopher Columbus pulled up in the Bahamas, he said, I see black people. The Olmec heads are obviously Negroid featured beings. So they felt natives belonged here. Black folks were brought here. That's what they have in their mind. They don't know that a lot of natives were African people. Africans were on every continent. That's why it's pyramids on every continent. Don't believe me? Look at the state flag of Florida before 1980. There are no hills in Florida. None. It's pyramids on that flag. I didn't make the flag. Look it up. See if I'm lying. There are pyramids on the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River was settled just like the Nile was. So, again, primary sources, primary sources, primary sources. We are going to do our next primary sources are going to be the Confiscation Acts.